Hello, and welcome to the inaugural book club of Fantasy Awash with Laura and Josh book club. Hello, hi, Slay. Tonight we are going to be talking about John Gwynne's Malice. Had a lot of feelings while reading this book. I want to preface this by saying when we talked about starting a book club, it was because Josh and I wanted to have something to talk about because we both read.
Because otherwise our relationship is completely devoid of anything.
There's nothing. But we both read, but we weren't reading any of the same things. So having conversations with each other about what we were reading was becoming a little bit problematic because sometimes we were reading the same series, but we were never in the same place. So we thought, it would be a fun idea. Let's read some of the books that we collectively want to read for book club that we anticipate we're going to like, and then we can talk about them. So when we decided to start book club, we thought we'd start with Malice.
Which you got me as a Christmas gift thinking I was going to like it.
I did. Hello, Simon. And I think that is a good segue to jump in to the rating that we each gave this book. So I'm going to let you.
Are we doing it
begin.
Out of 5 stars?
Sure.
Because that seems to be what YouTube likes to do.
Sure.
And are we going halvesies?
What do you mean?
Like 4.5, 3.5, 2.5.
Sure.
1.5 stars.
Do you want to elaborate?
No. I figured that's what we'll be discussing with everyone as to why. But I think I would give it 1.5 stars.
I am not that far off. I think I'm probably also at a 1.5 to 2.
You're not that far off.
I'm really not that far off. This was a big disappointment. It was a Christmas present. I had done research and thought people like this book, and Josh also might like this book.
My Christmas is now ruined.
It's ruined 6 months later. I'm assuming, Simon, this means your rating was 2 stars. There's a lot to say, I feel like, of what made the rating.
Very generally speaking, we'll get into more details, but if you could sum up just 1 or 2 very general high-level reasons as to what stood out to you the most, why this book was what you rated it.
Boring and slow, I think, would be collectively 1. And I found that the book was an amalgamation of other books shoved into this book, but done worse.
I would say characters. To me, the characters were exceedingly derivative of each other. And an over-reliance, this is sort of a sub thing, but it's a pet peeve of mine, over-reliance on action. I personally do not like action. It's good when it is a character building function or has a plot building development function.
Yes.
And this book was full of the play-by-plays of thrust and parry and riposte and counter riposte. And it was maybe a quarter of it was action. And
it was a lot.
And it didn't do anything.
It was a lot. So I think this is a good little segue that we can talk about the story as a whole. So one of the things I want to say is that I actually really liked the prologue of this book. I was intrigued by the prologue and thought it was a good setup. And
the prologue character, I know it has the God War review too, but Evnus, I would say, is on the extreme of, if there's interesting characters in here, he's one of the few that I would put as interesting. I agree.
Evnus was probably the POV that I was the most interested in, and he seldom gets a POV, which is highly frustrating. So I'm going to be referencing my little red book here of notes. This section here, people, are like main character names that you need to know really early into the book. And this was something for me that was highly problematic. And we're going to kind of get into the nitty gritty of story and problems and everything and how they intertwine. Hey, Kale, how's it going? But the main thing for me was that, and I mentioned this in the rating section, that this book to me felt way too copycat of specifically A Song of Ice and Fire, specifically A Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time's Eye of the World, and The Warlord Chronicles. It took from these 3 series and put it into 1. And I did a comparison because Malice is 7 POVs, which is a lot. It's a lot. But Game of Thrones, the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire is 8. But I think that the distinction between the two is that when you look at the POVs for A Song of Ice and Fire, it's Ned, Catelyn, Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Jon, Daenerys, and Bran. They're all unique voices.
But also, too, the characters, the world building in this is thrown at you. And it does help that the world is pretty much a very bland place. Robert Jordan, I'm not a massive Jordan fan, but something I think he did probably better than anybody I've ever read is he built a world.
His world building was very good.
Every nation is different, but the nations near each other share some similarities. Nations far apart don't really have any. Here, you have the horse people. You have the Valthaloon, who are, Vikings in essence, I guess. And and then every other nation
is the same.
The culture, the people, I don't understand if there's any difference. So when you're reading about all these nations, it was a lot of proper nouns in the first few chapters. But I feel that I had to put work in, which I don't like feeling like I'm working when I'm reading. Whereas
I don't mind depending on the book.
But when you have a number of POVs, but they're intertwined, like Catelyn, Ned, Bran, Jon, their stories are all intertwined. It's Sansa and Arya, so there's 6 of them.
Most of them are Starks.
And then, as Laura mentioned, the unique voices versus the Evness, Castle. They're the same character.
Evness? Do you mean Veritas?
I'm not Veritas. Excuse me. Veritas and Castle they read like the same character to me. Even their background of being sort of like second sons.
Yeah, I agree that Wheel of Time is a strong comparison. The thing that we'll talk about is that Wheel of Time, Perrin and Rand are Corbin. So if you've read Wheel of Time, it's those two characters combined to make Corbin. But good choice. Honestly, good choice. I had this feeling that all of the teenage boys are the same. And this is why I feel like, in part, this was so disappointing, because the prologue, like Wheel of Time for me, I enjoyed. The prologue of Wheel of Time is my favorite prologue of all time. And then the story doesn't work for me.
And Evness being a POV character, so you have Castle as a POV, and when there's a problem, he shoves a sword in it.
Yep.
And then Veratus, when there's a problem, he shoves a sword in it. And Corbin, when there's a problem, his wolf shoves a bunch of things. And Tywin throws daggers at it. It's the reactions of all these characters. They read so similar. It was difficult to differentiate them first off, and then it was also difficult as you got into the story to really. It's read like a story being told from one POV.
Well, I feel like that's not the only problem with the POVs. It's not. But the main thing is that the storylines within the POVs, I feel, are repetitive. It's a lot of young boys that have complicated relationships with their fathers, and it's just being recycled over and over and over. And that comes up even at the very last chapter of the book.
I know the big secret, Hallion, he also is the
He's
same
also
as
a disgruntled son. Surprise. So for me, okay. The beginning of the book starts with Evness, who is in this dark woods that's making this deal. I'm so sorry. This might not be the place for you, but you're welcome to stay. It starts with him making this deal with this, or declaring himself for the Dark God, which is this god named Azeroth, which, as World of Warcraft players, every time, because I did the audiobook for this, because if you've been here for the last few weeks, I'm getting over the world's worst sinus infection. I couldn't read anything. I heard Azeroth every single time. And I kept then being transported to World of Warcraft, which wasn't a bad thing. But that has also a couple other characters that are there. Rin and Uthas are there. And that's when Evness learns about this book, which is initially where my brain starts going, okay, we've got magical objects in this world. Great. I love a magical object story. However, the magical object that really got my senses tingling in a negative way was the cauldron. And this is because this is straight up stolen from the Warlord Chronicles. This is something I just read where Merlin has this cauldron and he's trying to collect the items of Britain. And it's the same thing in this book.
I don't know if I agree with you on that. A cauldron is is not limited to these two works. It is.
No, it's not. It's common. Hey,
it's
Daniel.
something that's, but it doesn't help. I think that's sort of going back to the really big. It was difficult for me to, and I haven't been able to really. Every book I read is like something unique. What's something unique I can say about this book that it did that other books have not? Whether it be the story, how it's written, the character, something. I couldn't pick one out for this. I mean, there was nothing about I could felt.
The prologue for me was probably the best part.
It was. Also, if we're on the characters, which we are, something that bothered me was the fact that it seems that there is, and I can give a big example and a small example, but characters just make decisions and go along with the story to go along with the story. A big example of this is there's the God War. And someone reads from a book, so everybody believes, oh, well, it's the God War. Oh, no, look, there's an eclipse. So now there's not a single voice that says, wait, maybe this isn't the God War.
Yep.
Everyone just accepts it. And on the small scale, when they go to Surmer, the king, I forget in Tarbash, I forget the name of the city, but Surmer's the king. And Claudius, which the city is hidden by a gigantic magical glamour that is used by the people to hide their city. But then when Claudius says, oh, by the way, I have wings and I'm a Ben Elim, which is clearly just a glamour because he's evil, then these same people are like, oh, he's a magical Ben Elim. We believe you now. So I had trouble really buying the character's decision-making and the lack of any voice in the narrative that does not go along with the narrative in order to move the narrative along.
So speaking of Ben Elim, I want to talk a little bit about religion and faith and all of the stuff in this book because it is my jam. I love religion and fantasy, as people know. Again, okay, we've got the black sun and the bright star. We've got this notion of darkness versus light. This is not something that is unique to any one particular story. We haven't gotten to Dumbledore yet. It's coming, Brian. Hold on. We'll get there in like 10 minutes. But again, this gave me massive Wheel of Time feels in that you have, obviously, it's a similar story in that it's a chosen one trope. Like, there's not too many things wrong with the chosen one trope. It's not my favorite of all of the tropes in fantasy, and you are going to often have that good and evil aspect, darkness versus light. In this world, it manifests as the black sun and the bright star. You have this God War that's going to be happening. Its representatives are going to be one that's good and one that's evil. And then there's this basically, I don't want to call it a miscommunication trope because it's not really that. I think it's almost just like an eagerness to believe that you are a chosen one, and that ends up plaguing Nether's character. And I really wanted to like this because religion is one of the things that can often really pull me into a story. But I felt like it was so surface level that there really wasn't much nuance in that. It's not surprising that it's Nether, like, at all.
One thing I did like is that the evil person, which, I mean, I figured it was Nether I figured there was no surprise in this book at all. So I thought Nether's going to kill his father, and he's going to be the chosen one, but really be the evil one from like the second chapter with him. But I do like the fact that the evil one, a lot of books, the evil one in essence knows he's evil. He just wants power. At least in this one, Nether views himself as good, which is something that a lot of bad people view themselves as. So I did like that you have the evil one versus the good one, but in their minds, it's good versus good.
Right. I mean, Nether's kind of holy war journey, I think, could have been interesting in that it's someone who believes that they're righteous and they're doing the right thing and they're taking the right steps, when you as the viewer realize that these are not any of the right steps and that he's been pretty easily corrupted. And that I think it's one of those circumstances in which it's someone that has been desperately trying to seek approval and has never been given it. And then someone shows up and says, you're special. And he goes, great. I've been waiting to be special my whole life. I'm going to do all the bad things now that make me special. And it was just really, really frustrating. He is really dumb. I agree. It's not malice and stupidity. The thing with his character is that it kind of goes back to what I was just saying. It's someone that has never really been in a position of being respected because their father is a ruler, therefore they've been treated with some kind of privilege and reverence just by extension their whole life, but it's never been based on his attributes, his person, like what his actual worth is. And when someone finally shows up who doesn't even really know him and is singling him out saying, you are special, he goes, yes, and gleams onto that because he just gloms onto that because he is desperately seeking the approval from anybody. But my issue is that Veritas blindly follows this the whole time. Veritas. I think the degree to which you are feeling up for a fairly standard fantasy story. Yeah, I agree. I think that this is kind of what I've said about Wheel of Time too. Depending on where this book comes to you in your fantasy reading journey, I think could greatly impact your feelings towards it. I think if you are someone that has read a lot of epic fantasy, then this might not hit all the right notes for you. But if it's your first epic fantasy, it might be something that resonates and hits a little bit harder.
I mean, it is epic. I mean, it takes place over, it sort of fits that definition, which I do feel that the book was sort of a paint by numbers feel to it of epic fantasy, but it's a large world, large concepts, armies fighting, magic. I mean, it really fits into that epic fantasy.
Yeah,
but it is. I mean, it's a very, very standard, as you say, fantasy story that doesn't. Yes. And there's just nothing about it I can point to that I haven't seen in another book.
So I wrote down key things and key tropes from the book. So obviously we have the chosen one trope, and that is Corbin, which I think is pretty apparent from pretty much the first chapter of the book. That's pretty standard for our epic fantasy books. Chapter 1 is going to be your chosen one character, which is fine. It's formulaic, and that's kind of what people have come to expect. And I think that part is fine. So we have the chosen one. We have good versus evil. So again, pretty standard for an epic fantasy. A coming of age story, which pretty common with a chosen one trope. I feel like there's not really ever been a chosen one in fantasy for the most part that isn't already older. Maybe Zach Argyle's Threadlight, where it's the father of the chosen one. That's someone that's a little bit older, and there's certain characters in Stormlight Archive, specifically Dalinar, who's an older character, but again, not necessarily the chosen one. So that's a thing.
I have heard
this is a common thing
that the first book is the weakest of the bunch.
Yeah, this is definitely a common thing that we have been told, especially over the last few weeks. Then there's the mentor aspect of having our mentor in the story. So what did you think of having our older character, Gar, kind of leading Corbin around?
It was one of the aspects of the story I did like. I mean, again, it's something we've seen before, but I mean, every book is going to have stuff we've seen before.
Yeah.
But I thought that Gar's presence, it was clear that Gar wasn't just a simple stable hand. You know, he's there for a reason. I feel that Gwynne didn't really hide anything from the reader. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not one of these people that's like season 8 Game of Thrones, subvert my expectations with, random crap that you haven't ever hinted at, but I would like a little bit of a surprise here and there. Gar is probably my second favorite character in the book. But I thought it was fine. The thing where he and Corbin's parents know what he is, that got to be a little much for me.
Well, there's also other people who know how important that Corbin is.
Michael,
yeah. Which I didn't love. Like, I really didn't love that. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if I hate it yet or if I'm mid on it, but to me, it's kind of one of those things where I feel like if they know that about him, they probably should have done a little bit better in terms of trying to prepare him on certain things. Like, obviously, Corbin is going for training, like he's learning how to fight. So that part of it is happening, but it feels like his mom is really overprotective, like, which of course she's a mother, she's going to be to some extent, but like, I don't know. It didn't feel fleshed out enough for me.
I think it sort of goes back to the thing where there's really nothing. It's the plot, and everyone's just sort of going along with the plot. No one, if Gar had said, you know what, I like this boy too much over the last 16 years of my life, in essence, raising him.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let this happen. And I'm taking him with me and I'm GTFOing. I feel that something like that would have been refreshing, but it was just, everyone was like, they sort of gave it the lip service, but then nothing else. It was just, it's as you knew it was going to happen.
So the last few I have are prophecy and the Dark Lord, which, like, again, a pretty common thing in epic fantasy, which, like, I love a good prophecy trope. So I'm on board for a prophecy. Like, that's fine with me. I actually didn't hate the prophetic nature of, like, when he shows up and he's kind of telling Nether, like, this is what's going to happen. Like, I like getting that religious context, what it's supposed to be, what it could be. I would have preferred to see maybe, like you were saying, a bit more resistance, reluctance to accept that, just because, like, someone is showing up as like, have you heard? This is what's going to be going down. And people are like, okay, let's get ready. There's this black sun thing that's going to be showing up like real soon. So we need to get really, really organized really fast. And
I'm just trying to think, did any character ever not accept something in the book? Like, I guess Owain didn't accept the idea that he was being manipulated.
Yeah.
I can't really think of someone else that really on a big scale didn't accept something. It just seems like everyone just would have, okay, there's a God war because someone read from a book. Let's go fight.
It would have been good if Corbin would have read a book. But Rand, I have a lot of things to say about Rand, but that's a different show.
That's a different.
I have not. Maybe I should have, but no, we have not read that. But I want to then talk about companions, because companions and pet companions kind of leans in once again into something where I get really nitpicky, as people know, about animals in books, because often bad things happen to said animals, and I get really upset.
I wouldn't say you're nitpicky. I'd say you're overly sensitive.
I actively hate it, because I will cry and then wallow around the house for weeks, like, unable to control my sadness. And when Storm showed up, a wolven, I thought, you know what that reminds me of? A dire wolf.
Well, this is something too that I know Celebrity is not on yet, but it's something he pointed out. It's true. There was the scene where Corbin rescues Storm's mom. Does he not, in his internal dialogue, say, this thing is going to kill me if I rescue it?
Yep.
So I'm going to rescue it. Like, again, it's just sort of like, that doesn't make sense. There's a lot of little lines like that throughout. That's another thing I had. I'm kind of getting off your topic, but there's a few things throughout the book that just didn't make sense. That, there's a scene where Nether's troops have landed to attack, what's his face? The bad king that was the first one to die, that killed his dad.
Yeah.
But his troops have landed and they're having a conversation, including the general, and Rauka and Paratus and Veratus are having a conversation. And Veratus looks over at the water and says, oh yeah, the ships that are unloading, they stop unloading, they put back out to sea and they turn left and they go. That process takes like an hour. And meanwhile, these three guys then just continue the conversation. And it's just like, they're not sitting there for an hour watching ships while the army is, by Veratus's own admission, disorganized. Like, that's just little stuff like that kind of took me out of it.
Yes. I would also 11 out of 10 adopt Storm. I would have saved all of them. But I also wouldn't have been thinking, those are probably going to kill me. I should go save all of them, because that seems a little counterintuitive. But I mean, that's Corbin in a nutshell. So I struggled a little bit with that concept being taken is seemingly directly from a Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire.
But again, it's sort of like your cauldron thing. I feel that's, well, yes, that is very similar to other things like Perrin and his wolves and Game of Thrones. It just exists. That's not something
I get that. But also then things like terminology, like the long night. That's also straight out of A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah,
like,
it means something different.
I get that it does, but it's like, it just felt like, for me, Gwynne almost wanted to write his version of fan fiction of his favorite stories. And I know for a fact that Warlord Chronicles was one of his inspirations because I went and I read about it on his Goodreads page today because I was curious, because I wanted to know, to have my facts in front of me. That book has 41,303 reviews on Goodreads and is rated on an average 4.17 stars. We are severely in the minority for not liking this book. So I was curious as to how other people felt about it. I then went and I read Reddit reviews and all kinds of stuff. And it was kind of like what we were talking about a couple minutes ago, that a lot of people felt that book one, very poor in comparison to the rest of the series. Also very poor as an entire series in comparison to his Bloodsworn saga, I believe is the name of the second series that he has. And people were saying, you know, it felt kind of repetitive a lot of the time. And I agree in terms of a lot of the stuff in this book felt very repetitive. I don't feel like beyond, you have the prologue, and then I don't really think the plot really gets moving until probably 80% through the book.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I think that, again, I think a lot of attention is given to action scenes that don't have a bearing on the plot. And it's given to, I mean, Corbin basically is the same guy. He finds his Wolven, he takes his warrior test, and that's sort of what happens to him.
Yeah. Thank you, Jake. You could have given me a heads up before I read this book. Would have been much appreciated. When we get to the end of our chat and you guys get to find out what our book read is for next month, you can give us a vibe check at that point. Yes, I think that maybe if you didn't have Malice as book one and maybe just had the other three books, that might be a good start. But
well, let me ask you, because there's one character, he's a very minor character, I guess, Gar, and there's one other character I really liked. And did you like any characters?
Let me go back to my very long list.
I liked Vaughn a lot.
I know you like Vaughn.
Because I like the fact that he's probably the only character that makes a decision that isn't consistent with the previous character you've read about. Like he's a jerk. He's not like as bad a jerk as Rafe, who was there just to be a jerk. But,
yeah,
you know,
he's given no flesh.
But Vaughn is there. He's Evnus' son, and you know, he could probably, that's probably colored him a little bit. But then at the end, he joins up with Corbin and his band, and I like that. I thought Vaughn was a pretty good character.
I didn't dislike Vaughn. I was fine on him. Evnus really was the character that I liked the best. Ventos, I thought, was a bit interesting for the few POVs that we got him kind of coming in. Do you remember Ventos?
No.
Ventos, I believe, is the one who was who also knows about Corbin and talks to the parents, or to his mom specifically, a couple of times.
Miko.
Okay. Is it? Am I confusing it? Someone confirm if I'm confusing Ventos. But also, Macwin.
Oh yeah, I forgot about him.
I liked Macwin. I thought he was good.
They're all tertiary characters that like Vaughn and Macwin. It's like I wish we got more of those guys.
Why do I like Evnus? That's actually why I like him, because sometimes I like when you and I kind of differ on this sometimes, and that Josh
differ on it a lot.
Josh likes a very fleshed out reason for someone being bad, which I can get behind depending on the story. But people sometimes are just shitty people. And it seems like Evnus has a little bit of reasoning behind that in terms of his familial structure, and that
But like you said, it is a petty reason.
It is a very petty reason. But I like that sometimes, knowing that not every character is just good. It might make them a bit more nuanced. It might just mean that they're a bigger POS. Like, I like having characters that can be the foil sometimes, especially in a book that has this many characters, where so many of them are younger and innocent, and you know that they're not going to be quote unquote bad characters. So I liked Evnus for that reason. Some characters get more spotlight in sequels. Yeah, I believe Macwin is one of those characters. Yeah, I don't think I'll be going forward. At least not for a seriously long time.
I have a curiosity about what comes next, and given the fact that people have said that this is by far the weakest book, I have a feeling I am going to be reading book 2, not anytime too soon, but after I get through some others, if I if my list starts getting a little smaller, that's a big if. But if it does, I might pick up book 2 and see what it's all about.
Looking at my list, though, in terms of characters, I enjoyed Veritas because Veritas is our POV on Nether, and he's the one that's really spotlighting what's going on that side of the dynamic, I want to call it. I will say for many parts of the book, I was confusing Castell and Veritas because their plots the characters felt very similar. But yes, but I did like Veritas the more that he started having conflict with himself, specifically when he kills that king later on in the story. I have given many good Christmas.
She last year, a year and a half ago, she got me Lines of Our Son, which opened up the world of GGK to me. And it's probably my second favorite book of all time. So
I've nailed it for the most part. This is a one-off.
There's been a few that I haven't liked, and there's been more often. But yes, I will seek out I could do a coloring book or something.
Great. Veritas was the best main POV. I agree. I think, he fights Azeroth influence, and that is a real struggle there. Agreed. Veritas is also my favorite. Yeah, I think he's the one that for me, he has his own kind of conflict with his father that you see, especially when he returns with Nether, and he's been named as the top guy for Nether, and his dad still doesn't give a shit and treats him with quite a bit of disdain. But he has a decent relationship with his brother, even though he struggles, I think, with that relationship because he's stuck in the shadow of his brother. And I liked after the death of Aquilus, seeing how Veritas was trying to put the pieces together in his head while he was trying to stay loyal to Nether, especially when the king, whose name I believe Mandros. I always know it starts with an M, but I can never remember it. When Mandros gives that declaration right before he dies,
I'm sorry, that scene
was a lot.
I thought that scene was. I'm not trying to hate on Gwynne. Don't get me wrong, but I thought that scene was poorly written with Veritas when Mandros exits and then he goes in and Aquilus is dead and Nether has been stabbed. The character, both Veritas and Mandros, how those characters responded to that did not make sense to me. It was one of those things where we have to have Mandros be the enemy down the line in a few chapters, so he just needs to leave. But then when Nether kills his father and stabs himself, I don't know. That was probably the worst scene in the book, in my opinion, just because.
I think that's fair. There's so many of them.
But
there's so many.
But they're all the same.
That's it. All the same.
Cultures, except for the Surmer, except for the horse folks and the Valthalin, and like those, and they're on the periphery. The rest of the geography in the center and to the west.
I feel like the Giants have probably their own culture, but we really haven't gotten much of that other than the fact that they do the drags. Yeah, well, isn't Castell the son of a giant? Isn't he?
Wait, what?
Isn't he related to giants? Am I completely making this up?
He killed one.
He killed a giant.
Well, I think.
Why am I thinking he's related to giants? Someone.
He's related to Jail.
I don't know.
Who is? By the way, I liked Jail because he's a real jerk. But
I had to look at the map so often. Yeah, I don't blame you. That's the thing. I love a good map and a big scope for a world, but this felt unnecessary.
Going back to Wheel of Time, when when he said Geldon, I know where that is. I know what those people look like. I know what the culture is. The biggest cultural difference with these 12 nations in the central and western of the world is one uses a shield wall now when they fight. That's the only real difference that I could discern. Camlin, by the way, also a decent POV character.
I think we get 4 of them
towards the end. Yeah,
we don't get as many as I would have liked. I'm trying to just look at my notes here to see if there was anything specific in terms of.
I did think plot. Overall the pacing could have used a little more synchronization throughout the book. I felt that at times things happened a little too slowly, and then at times, just for example, when Morkent and Tull had their duel, it escalated real fast. It was two guys looking at each other you want to fight? Yeah, let's fight. Okay, well, and then but then we got 3 or 4 lines of escalation before they dueled, but then we got 4 pages of every sword thrust, and it was just, I want character development. I don't care about parries.
I feel like, how did Laura feel about Nethair spontaneous? I thought that was real interesting, seeing as he had no right to do such a thing. So I don't know.
You can improve. People, like, how did the shield wall first get created? I mean, someone thought to ourselves, well, hey, maybe we should do this.
Listen, I feel like there's there's a lot in this book that, yeah, he was pretty cool for that. I think Matt kind of just said it, that there's a lot of things in this book that are interesting. And I just don't think that many of them are executed well. And I feel like the area that Gwynne probably does the best is writing fight scenes. I don't love them because I'm not an action and fighting driven reader. It's not a plot point that I tend to really gravitate towards. But I think that he does well in those moments. I really felt like I wish he would have taken that amount of detail and applied that to things like dialogue.
Well, you do write your strengths, and you can tell from the picture of John Gwynne sitting with his dogs like Storm and his axe that he knows that well. Hey, Caleb. I did notice, I feel like John Gwynne, we love D&D, and I feel like John Gwynne plays a lot of D&D because how many times, did you pick up on how many times in this book you got the marching order of like so-and-so's in front and then so-and-so's next and so-and-so's behind? And then when people were talking, he would then reestablish the marching order because, the DM, when he asks, so who's in front, you're about to roll for initiative.
Exactly. It's always an int roll, that's what's happening.
It's a wisdom roll.
It's a wisdom roll, which I feel like there's not many wisdom rolls that are happening in this book.
Not in this book.
Not in this book, no. So, okay. Was there a plot point in this book that you enjoyed?
I did enjoy, if we're talking large scale, I mean, like, I enjoyed Vaughn in essence switching sides, we'll call it.
Okay.
On the large scale, I thought Nethair's use of the Valthaloon and going behind his father's back to make an alliance, I did find it a little fishy in the sense that he has thousands of guys with him. And the idea that his father's just not going to find out when you have people return, like you have warriors returning and they're probably going to be drinking with their buddies and stuff, like word's going to get around in a matter of minutes of what happened. But I did like the plot point of Nethair sort of, playing his first politics. I liked Veratus and it happened pretty quickly, but his becoming first sword to Nethair and sort of going from, second son nobility to
a notable
right-hand man.
Yeah.
So there were a few plot points that I feel were executed pretty well.
Yeah. Okay. This for me was the thing too, because I genuinely enjoyed the relationship between Nethair and Veratus. I think that it was probably the best relationship in the book, probably other than Corbin and Gar. Because Gar is obviously that wise man figure. He's our Dumbledore of this story, if we want to go back to Brian's comment earlier. So now we're at Dumbledore, Brian. And, I liked they're mirrors of each other in a lot of ways, in that they're both struggling for recognition from their fathers. They're both people that are kind of being held back from their potential. Nethair is then giving Veratus this opportunity, and then Nethair seizes an opportunity for himself because, he's holy and righteous. I think that it is really well done, the relationship between the two of them. But I think what's interesting, and if I were to go forward with these books, what I would hope to see is Veratus's internal struggle with supporting Nethair and understanding that Nethair isn't who he claims to be, and seeing the breaking of that relationship, because I think that would be really interesting. And we do get that little snippet at the very end where he's kind of like regretting the fact that he's killed M. King. Mandros, again, can't remember his name, but I liked that dynamic quite a bit. So I will say in terms of overall favorite character, including Evnus, I think Veritas was my favorite character. So he was probably the plot point that I was the most interested in. Favorite plot point was just straight up Veritas. There's a fantastic love story in the series, but you need to read the next 3 books. So we haven't read that one.
Out of curiosity, without spoilers, have we met both or all the characters involved in that love story in book 1?
Mm-hmm. You do get more relationships I enjoyed. That's good to know. Yeah, that might not be a series for us. We've been hearing quite a bit about this lately and how it's fairly reminiscent of the Wheel of Time, at least Eye of the World. So I'm not really sure. Achilles, Romar, Brennan, and Mandros are all murdered by Team Nether. They sure are. I mean, he's
team good guy.
Yeah, that's right. He is leading the Holy War, and oh boy, is it a thing? You never believe who it is. Okay, so that makes me think. Is it
Corbin and Storm?
Well, maybe, but that makes me think it's Adana and somebody that's not Corbin.
I wonder if does it necessarily? I don't know. I was getting the Nether and Veritas vibes.
I could see that, but I don't think that's who it would be. But I would actually be really interested if that's the case. I think that would be really interesting. I mean, that seems obvious. So I would hope that that's not the case. So here's kind of, if we were to go forward with this series, okay, because that's kind of the point that Josh and I are at right now, where it's not something that we would jump into immediately or ever. But if we were, what would our hopes be for the series? My hope is that Corbin dies at the end. Because I really like when a chosen one has a purpose, fulfills said purpose, and then disappears. Like, it doesn't have to be that they die, but they're gone. Which would then make me hope that the romance wouldn't be with Adana. I don't want her getting left alone in the end.
I think my hope for this year's would be that I feel the characters start reading differently, and there starts being some, whether it's internal monologue or just decision making, whatever it is, that just sort of goes against whatever is happening. It's things happen too easily in book 1.
Jake, we did give our ratings for this at the very beginning, and we were both at a 1.5. So you're pretty spot on the money there. I think he handles the pairings well, mostly. Yeah, I mean, I would be interested. I kind of like what you're saying though about Nether and Veritas. I don't know. I wasn't super picking up on it, but now that I'm thinking back on it, I'm like, yeah, I could get that vibe.
Takes a liking. When I was reading it, Nether takes a liking, it seems, to him really quickly. Maybe that's again because like a lot of other stuff, things just need to happen. Things just need to happen.
Yeah.
Like, the plot just goes on because plot has to go on. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I felt like Nether kind of liked him.
I mean, I would be fine with that.
And I didn't pick up on Nether ever having any kind of female romantic interest or any other.
No, I didn't get that vibe either. But I mean, typically I feel like the love interests happen more on the good side of things rather than the bad side. Like, it's pretty rare, I feel like, that unless you're in a very specific subgenre of romantasy, that you're getting a dark one getting a love interest. So I feel like
if you're doing that, would be fun to read a book though, but again, getting my point, where I like when bad guys are fleshed out and have reasons, and that would actually be good character development.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just come up with an idea, and unfortunately, a bigger author has a similar idea.
I do have, and I won't say any specifics. I'm not trying to call out any specific authors. But I'm curious as to what some of your opinions are. Like, what is an homage versus what is straight up copying? Because I'm not saying John Gwynne is straight up copying. I think there's a lot of similarities. But I know that there's another author that's out there that took just directly names and descriptions and the bad guys are the same and just took them from another series and used it as their own. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, like, to me, that's not an homage.
What's the line, basically, is what
exactly
saying.
What is that line?
Yeah, because I mean, listen, another thing that I noticed in this book was that Kynwyn from Warlord Chronicles is Kywin in this book. Of course. So close. Like, it's all there. Like, it's all there. It's just thievery at this point. If you gave Robert Jordan a vague description of the Knights Radiant and had him fill out the details of Knights Archer, would be almost exactly what he came up with. Yeah. So there's that. But I don't know. Like, I think that, okay, this is John Gwynne's first book, is my understanding.
It reads like a first book.
It reads like a first book, but I don't think that, occasionally, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. If I like it, it's homage. If I don't, it's copying. I think that's pretty spot on.
I mean, okay, well, I think that we have our answer.
Thank you for coming in for the save, Alan. I am generally on the team that things are plagiarism and copying way less often than people think it is. That being said, I have not read Warlord Chronicles. Jake, you would love Warlord Chronicles.
Oh, no.
Jake, come on. Interesting.
I did not know that.
I did not either. It's hard to come up with hard and fast rules. Yeah, I agree. I mean, Alan did.
It's sort of, well, I think it is. It's sort of like you'll know when you see it. I mean, in law school, there was something that, like, there were a few times people like, well, you know when you see it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I get this completely because often I feel that way too. However, I feel like it's just because this was so, Warlord Chronicles was so fresh on my brain because I read them in the same month. So
I think that this book has similar concepts to other things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it as, I'm going to name something the same name and I'm going to have it look the same way and do the same thing and play the same role.
Right.
Like, that's, I don't know, that's straight up plagiarism.
I think that there can be inspiration for things. And I feel like John Gwynne is an interesting case here because I think that he had a lot of really good ideas. I love the concept of a God war. Like, I'm all for that because my book has a God war. So I love that type of thing. I think that this could have been probably half as long. I feel like we could have eliminated a couple of the POVs. And I would have liked to have more leaning into maybe people questioning the return of these gods. Like, had that been the direction of the book, that would have been so much more interesting.
I mean, that scene with Surmer is just that I felt dumber for having read it, which your entire society's existence is based on using magic to fool people's views. And then you see something and say, oh, well, that's not magic. It just made no sense.
As an example, I think even how much the Wizard Church will come. Yeah.
Yeah. I have feelings on Good Kind. One particular scene got me on Good Kind, but
I agree. The first binding tested you. I got that completely. The characters start off very young. Yeah, I get that. I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's a missed opportunity that he didn't have older characters. Like, I understand that so many epic fantasy books want to have that journey with their character where they start out younger and it's them aging and progressing and maturing over the story. But I just wish that we had more epic fantasy stories where the protagonist or the chosen one is someone that is more established and experienced and mature. Because I feel like had that been the case for Corbin, you would have had all of that internal conflict, the struggling to accept, understanding more nuance of maybe what was going on, changes. The same with Nether. I think that would have been so much more interesting.
Also, part of the issue with younger characters is that very few authors write adolescent or preteen characters as you would expect them to be. Now, I love George Martin. He's my favorite author, and A Game of Thrones is my favorite book. Yes, agreed. But his writing of like 8-year-olds they would never think or say things like that. So I do think that Corbin and Kywin both came off to me as a little more mature than they should have been. Not to a
did they? Not for me.
Not to a terrible extent. I just felt that neither seemed ruled by their emotions enough for me. They seemed too thoughtful too often.
I didn't really get that, especially with Gwynne.
I didn't think that it was a bad thing. I didn't think it was to like a George Martin extent of like Bran is 7 and he would never do that.
The one thing I wish we could have had more of in terms of saying I want another POV in this book, it's that I wish we could have had a more assertive female POV, because Kywin, I feel, kind of falls into that trap of being, are you coming over here? Can you just decide already? Of being our stereotypical young female in fantasy that's just
She's
like
not
all the
stereotypical.
tropes.
She throws knives.
Exactly. So I mean, she's stereotypical in a lot of fantasy. I feel like she's just not well thought out. Like, she's caring, she's kind, all of those things are great, but I wish that she would have been maybe like the older sibling. I think even that would have been more interesting for me.
If there's this many characters and there's 7 POVs, I feel that you needed more variety in the POVs. You needed more women, and you needed more age difference, and you needed more personality types.
Yes, I agree, because all of them are kind of like lesser Veritas. So how would you describe this book to someone? Like, if someone randomly approached you on the street and was like, what's the last book you read? And you were like, Malice. And they go, I never heard of it. How do you describe that book?
I mean, this might sound a bit harsh. I describe it as an entertaining D&D campaign.
I think that's actually pretty accurate, honestly.
I mean, I think that it just had that feel of an epic D&D campaign that a group of friends play over a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, you could tell how much fun Gwynne had writing this.
Yeah.
And I think that there is definitely potential there, but I feel it was unrealized in book 1.
Mm-hmm. So, Brennan, in terms of this, for me, old would have been more interesting had he been like 27. Because I think at that point in this world, realistically, like a 27-year-old would probably be married, middle-aged, maybe have a kid or two. That would also add stakes to it. Like, you have to leave your family, because that's a whole plot point, right? Is that you're like gearing up to leave, or he has to leave and his mom doesn't want him to yet because he's not ready. And it's like, well, what if he was forced to leave a wife or children? Like, what does that look like? How does that amp up the stakes? I just think that something like that would be more interesting to me personally. Yeah, that's not wrong either. I don't think that's wrong. I do
think that's something
that's good.
I do think that's something that I would have liked to also have seen. I did mention this, but give me something that I didn't quite expect. Mm-hmm. I felt that everything that happens, it's big. Just like Nethair killing his father, that was something that I thought was going to happen from the first scene. You know, mm-hmm. As soon as Corbin, clearly Corbin's going to get a wolf pet when he says this wolf will kill me if I let it go, and then immediately lets it go. But I would have liked a little more surprise, fair surprise, not just random stuff, but
yeah. Thank you, Slay. That's very nice. After hearing Josh's take on the backstory and reasonings of evil characters, I'm really eager to find out who his favorite fantasy villain is. Ooh.
Okay. I mean, you need to make a video with me for this. So put me on the spot. I'd have to say that
I mean, I have an answer, but you don't view him as a villain. I view him
Theon?
as correct.
Well, Theon's my favorite character in the Song of Ice and Fire series. I can see him being a villain, of course. He killed his sons.
I know, but you don't view that.
But I would say maybe Tywin Lannister, I think, plays the role of a villain.
Tywin.
It's, oh my gosh, this is hard for me. I'm trying to go series by series now. But I got to get back to you on that. It's like, I will answer that question, but I need to think about it, because that is.
We do like Ishi.
Ishmael's he's the only one I like on, Moghedion's kind of fun too, but she has a boring end.
A little bit, yeah. We do get older characters in perspective in the next books, and if there's mom gets a good arc, that's good. I'm happy to read that. I think he is a villain in Clash of Kings. He definitely is a villain in Clash of Kings. He said villain, not misunderstood hero. That's your Theon support train right there.
Hey, Matt, thank you very much for being the first person to ever even come close to agreeing with me.
Sorry for putting you on the spot. Hey, I mean,
no, this is it, because now
is his favorite thing to talk about Theon.
I'm going to be up till probably midnight tonight, going through like the bookshelf and all the books I've read and thinking about who my favorite villain is now.
I have a question for those of you who have read all of these books, though. If you love Faithful and Fallen, what would be your way to convince us to continue with this series? Because obviously we have not had the same reaction that you have had while reading this, or if you did have a similar reaction while reading Malice, what compelled you to go on with the remainder of the books? Because I'm genuinely curious. You are a nightmare.
Yes, he is.
Because I would like to know, just in terms of what compels someone to continue on.
Also, I'd like if people also just said who their favorite fantasy villain is too.
I mean, that becomes a whole other conversation.
I know.
Gwynne is older, and I'd say he's the most memorable POV. You are not the first person to tell that to me, Daniel. Actually, Tori was telling me that just a couple of days ago when I was complaining to her about this book. So yeah, she was saying that Gwynne is also her favorite character. They're more of a ride here on out. That's good to know. I'm still.
Would you consider Alfred a villain in the Warlord Chronicles? Or not the Warlord, in the
Saxon Chronicles?
Saxon Chronicles.
Yeah, I was very confused for a second. Yeah. I was like, Alfred.
Because as Uhtred's POV, I would say that he could fit the definition of a villain.
I could see that. Oh, thank you, Simon. Thanks for sticking with it. We all suffered through together. Yes, we did. Don't know how to answer that. You guys aren't really selling us on continuing with this book. Yeah, I mean, maybe not. Here's Brian. I read the series with the understanding that book 1 was overwhelmingly considered the weakest. So I expected it and didn't mind it at all. Still not sure the series would be your gem, though. I mean, these are all fair points.
I do think I want to read book 2 eventually, though.
Eventually. Maybe it'll be, I don't know if it'll ever be another book club read, but if we're running out of things. I'm running an evil campaign for AD&D.
Second edition. Oh,
Alan, are you still in the chat? Alan, if you are, you got to talk to Slay right now about second edition, because Alan is all about second edition.
Oh my gosh,
D&D right
both
now.
of you are nuts. Why are you rolling a number to subtract it when you should just be adding it? Third edition had combat much better. Third edition and Palladium combined. That's the way to go.
Any final thoughts on Malice before we talk about what next month's book is going to be?
Generally speaking, I thought that I was sad to see. I feel like he had a lot of good ideas, a lot of fun writing it. I just felt that the execution just wasn't there for this book. I
agree. I definitely feel like he needed a better editing team cut down the POVs. I feel like had we had 4 POVs, and just looking at my list right now of who those POVs would have been, obviously you need Corbin and Veritas. I think also then Evnus and Camelin. Yeah, I think that those probably would have been the 4 that I would have gone with. And then you can bring in the others in the next book. Like, that's fine once you've kind of asserted that and done it. How about this? This is a series about truth and courage. So if you don't continue, it means you like lies and cowardice. Bring on all the lies and cowardly feelings. A worthy sales attempt. Okay, so this was quite an experience for our first monthly book club. Obviously, this was not the expectation that we had going into it. We thought that we would probably really like this. I usually try to vet the books that I buy for Josh pretty well. If people know about me too, I go into almost all of my books blind. So I very seldom read a description. I just say it's a genre that I like, or it's an author that I know, or people that I trust their reviews on it. I'm going to give it a go. I knew nothing about Malice when I bought it for Josh, other than people were saying, if you like grimdark fantasy, chances are you'll like this series. Some cases I can see why people would say that, because there is a lot of combat and fighting, but I don't know necessarily if that would be the case for everybody. I didn't read super grimdark for me.
It read more military fantasy, if anything, just I think due to the amount of fighting and the amount of time we're sort of in the field with the characters. Like Castel's always in the field. Veritas goes on campaign a few times. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of fighting with Corbin's the second half of his. So
sure.
I think military fantasy was probably what I would consider this.
Sure. Okay. So We put up the poll in our Patreon a week or two ago because that's basically how we're doing our selection for each book. If you are a member of our Patreon and on our Discord, which you can come chat about the books that we're reading for book club, which is really fun. We do a monthly poll, and certain members of our Patreon get to put forward a book for suggestion or, you know, to vote on. And the winner for the July book was, you want to drum roll it? Be very dramatic. The Spear Cuts Through Water, which Evie is absolutely thrilled about, by Simon Jimenez. Again, I know nothing about this book other than the fact that Evie absolutely loves it and Caleb likes it a lot too. And both have told me that if we don't like it, that our friendship is over. Yes, Spear. So I think this is going to be an interesting read. Neither one of us has read anything by Simon Jimenez before. We are reading it in the month of July. I actually have the link ready to go with the date. I just didn't publish it yet, so I'm going to publish it after this live and make it so that everyone can see the exact date of when our next book club will be. The vibe check says that you will like it. I don't know Josh well enough, but since he really likes Lions of Renaissance, I assume he has good takes. I think it'll be good. Evie is very happy. When I put it on the options list, she was the first to select, and she obviously went with this one and has already told me that she didn't need another reason to reread it. So I'm curious. I've been told to kind of just go with the flow for this one and not really question things as we're reading, and then just reflect on it when we get to the end of the book. So we'll see how that goes, because I am an overthinker and analytical person. So I think that is going to be an interesting. I DNF'd it once, but this time I'll push through. I have faith in you, Simon. It'll be great. He does some really cool things in it. Awesome. As a warning, the start is like quite confusing. So if you have no idea what's going on for 60 pages in, that's fine. Great. So that's kind of confirming what I was saying. Did you filter out the votes of Evie's burner accounts? Right, they're all Evie. At least it tells you who votes for what, so that's really helpful. But I'm excited for this one, just because I know
because we've been
about
hearing between Evie and Caleb, we've been hearing for quite some time that we need to read this.
Exactly, and I actually really love the cover.
I like the colors on it.
Yeah, I guys, the hardcover for this book is like out of print and or
backwards.
I don't know if it's backwards for the people, or it's just backwards for us.
People.
Yes.
It's a new, Laura's laptop died, so this is a new one.
It is a new laptop. So can you guys confirm whether or not this is backwards for you? Because I'm curious, because my settings are not the same that they were with my old one. Well, on the old one, it also looked backwards, but on a replay,
because
it
we are
clear.
on the proper side, though.
Yes. So yeah, I don't know if it's actually backwards for the people. It's not backwards. Okay. Huzzah! Thank you. Yeah, I was about to say just accept this out for 60 pages, but after that you really get into the groove of things, and it's so worth it. Awesome. Not backwards. Looks fine to me. Excellent. Settings are great. If I get time, I'll try to read it too. Yes, Brian, absolutely. I thought it was going to be like a 3 stars, 65 pages in. Okay. Nice. The inside covers.
The hardcover.
Oh, yeah. So here's the thing. The hardcover was like $55 on Amazon, so that didn't happen. And then anywhere else, it was out of print, which is really upsetting because I always prefer buying.
It's on the watch list for for some of those book selling websites that I check periodically.
Yeah, so if only. If only. It shows you a mirror image. Thank you, Daniel. So if you would like to come hang out with us and talk about the book as we are reading it throughout the month of July, feel free to check out our Patreon. The link is in the description box down below. It also gives you access to our private Discord, which is really fun. We had a good time chatting with people about Malice as we trekked through this book collectively. And also, Josh and I are going to be starting a rewatch of Game of Thrones here pretty soon.
Can't wait for it to get through the first and only 6 seasons of the show. And
Yeah.
That'll be that.
It's gonna be real good. Josh has been pushing me to rewatch the show for a while. I have been very hesitant because of my feelings about the ending of the show, but
yeah, I have the same feelings, but the first 6 seasons were great.
It's gonna be a thing. So if you would like to come and do that with us also, that will be something that we will be posting on the channel, but also having chats about in the Discord. So any final thoughts on our first book club episode?
Thanks a lot for making me now get completely preoccupied with who my favorite villain is. Baez might be on that list too.
Love Baez so much.
But yeah, I mean, it was a good time, and thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you all so much. It is a great season. Thank you all so much for joining us for our first book club episode. I am going to release the thumbnail information for when we will be doing our live for The Spear Cuts Through Water. I think it's going to be the 25th or 26th of July. So a month from now, pretty much, minus a few days. But yeah, that's all. If you guys have any final thoughts on the book or whatever, you can let us know in the comments below before we leave here for the last couple of minutes. We'll go get to live ship and you can pick up. Yeah, I need to start Hob, but
you've been saying I'm gonna start.
I don't think I'm emotionally ready. I don't think I'm emotionally.
I don't think the animal stuff is quite as bad as you think.
I'm gonna release. I mean, we'll see. Maybe Hob will be a book club book. Maybe that'll be something that we do. But if you're watching us on a replay, let us know in the comments down below what you thought of Malice, and if you will be joining us for The Spear Cuts Through Water. You will be fine. Everyone keeps telling me this, but I don't know. I'm very anxious. Jake, you and I can talk about this because you have read all of the Song of Ice and Fire stuff, specifically Fire and Blood, because there's a scene in that book that makes me very upset.
Does it take place in a big pit named for dragons?
It does, and it makes me very upset. So Kent is definitely up there. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you have a lovely end to your Saturday or beginning of your Sunday, wherever you are in the world that you're watching this. If you're watching this live, enjoy the rest of your weekend regardless, and we will see you next time. See ya.